Okay, folks, this episode represents the new form that the melt will take for the foreseeable future, save for this prologue. Stripped down and focused on the content of the conversations, minus my standard introductions and the afterbabble at the end of the shows that Hunter and I do together, we will just be getting in and getting out. Our school schedules and work have to take precedence, and we will just have to fit in a show here and there as time permits. Better that than completely tying the melt to the dock for an indefinite amount of time. This way, we will still be taking it out for a spin now and again and leaving that project open to be consistently taken up again at a later time. Here is the last interview that we have recorded. Please enjoy it.
Hello, my name is Chris Snipes, and you are listening to The Melt.
Okay, well, let's maybe just start at a kind of a logical, reasonable place. Is there any thread any through line whatsoever that connects your last book, Upside Down Medicine, with this book? Because it's to the naked eye, it may seem like that would be a leap that has nothing to do with each other, but you, knowing you, there's got to be some connective tissue between those two things. But you tell me.
Yes, there is absolutely connective tissue. From a intellectual perspective in terms of the topics themselves, what I explored in medicine and cosmology dealt with flaws in logic, basically, where in both fields, the scientists and doctors are jumping to conclusions about causality and then calling it something with more definitiveness than they probably should, when in fact they're inferring that their model's correct and they're leaving out other possible models that could be correct. So that's the thematic continuity. But there's other continuity that I should give you as well. So the reason that I started to explore medicine, well, it was something that I had looked at for a long time because when I wrote my first book on consciousness and into upside down thinking, that was all about consciousness beyond the brain, and that inevitably gets you into things like energy healing in that world. So it was on my radar for sure. And then everything in 2020 that was going on that led me to look into the injections because people were very worried about that. And I do remember also in early 2020, there were people like Dr. Andrew Kaufman, Dr. Tom Cowan, the Baileys in New Zealand, who were saying maybe this alleged virus doesn't even exist and it deals with more fundamental problems in the field of virology. I put that aside because I was working on other things. It sounded very complex. Some people thought it was a psyop designed to distract people in the health freedom community who had otherwise good intentions, but maybe they would get sucked into this rabbit hole about viruses. So I didn't look into that for a while. Then in 2023, I met Alex Zek, who hosts the Way Forward podcast, and he's been very vocal about this issue in virology. He invited me to be on his series called The End of COVID, and it's still available at theendofcovid.com. It's maybe 100 plus hours of content. And he invited me to be a participant to talk about my political works. So, talking about the Great Reset, talking about liberty, but because I was a participant, I had access to some of the other interviews and I got to hear the doctors speak about flaws in germ theory. And then that led me down a rabbit hole. And I said, this is very important. I need to write about it. What I realized in that process is that many of the people that I respected so much who were questioning germ theory were also questioning cosmology. And they were saying, if you can see the ways in which people make logical fallacies around germ theory. I'll just give you one example. A bunch of people get sick in the same place, or a bunch of people go to a party, and then afterwards, some of them get sick with similar symptoms. They conclude, I caught something. meaning there's some microscopic particle that went from one person to another, infected their cells, all these things that no one has ever seen occur, but they conclude that it was viral. That is one very reasonable hypothesis, but there are many other reasons people can get sick. For example, toxins in the environment, food poisoning, EMFs, energetic resonance, meaning areas of science that we don't even fully understand, maybe even psychological conflicts like the realm of German new medicine, resolving conflicts. There's so many reasons people can get sick who are in the same place that have nothing to do with the virus. And this is a logical fallacy. It's known as affirming the consequent. The more I think about it, the more I realize this is the core to what I've been researching, which is ba- I'll give two statements. Statement number one is reasonable. Statement number two is where we get off course as a society. Statement one: when it rains, the grass outside will be wet. Statement two: this is the problem. I observe that the grass is wet, therefore it rained. When in fact there are many reasons that grass could be wet that have nothing to do with rain, like dew or sprinkler systems, or maybe elements of biology we don't understand. Huge, huge area of other possibilities. But what happens as a society, we get locked into a model that it rained, and any new observation will be forced into the model that it rained, and any observation that doesn't match that will get thrown out as an anomaly, just to put it lightly. And what I was hearing repeatedly is, Mark, this is going on in cosmology, and I got nudges from a bunch of people over over a period of time. And I read Stephen A. Young's book. He wrote A Fool's Wisdom. He's a theoretical physics PhD. So highly educated physicist wrote a book, April 2024. Everyone was talking about it, a lot of people I knew. And he says in that book, among many other things, I'm not 100% sure what this place is, but I can say with 100% certainty that it's not a spinning globe. Paraphrasing, but he says something to that effect that explicitly, which I quote in my book. And he went through some of the reasoning. It aligned with what I was seeing with germ theory. And then I started to look into it. And sort of like with viruses, or the idea more broadly that germs cause disease or that there is contagion, one would expect for such a widespread belief that there would be incontrovertible evidence using the scientific method. Slam dunk, it's over. Obviously, germs cause disease, viruses exist and cause disease. What I realized in the field of medicine is that I couldn't find that. All I was finding was indirect evidence and affirming the consequent logical fallacy. And even another one that is relevant to cosmology, it's called the reification fallacy. It's when you speak about something over and over again as if it's real, but it's never been established. It's just an abstraction. And the word virus or viral presupposes the existence of this thing. Same thing in cosmology with like dark matter and dark energy, other topics. So put this all together and I'm like, wow, I would love to prove the spinning globes to put this to rest and not have to think about it anymore. But the more I look into this from every angle, it's always indirect evidence. And your audience might be wondering, well, don't we have a lot of stuff from NASA? We do not have direct evidence of a spinning globe. Direct evidence would be video footage of the sphere of Earth doing a full rotation, where you'd be able to see the buildings on the top of the sphere standing upright, the buildings on the bottom hanging upside down, and the buildings on the side hanging on the side. You should be able to see all of that. Instead, we have many composite images, CGI images, artist renditions, images that are not high enough to actually see the full Earth. So we end up having to infer that there's a sphere, images that use a fisheye lens in which there is artificial curvature imposed on it, and even pictures that are just a circle. It's actually a disc. It's not a full sphere. And we're asked to make these inferences. And that's just NASA ignoring all the stuff with physics. So, Chris, that was a long winded way of saying that the medicine book absolutely played a role in the cosmology book, even though it sounds like they're very different disciplines.
Sure. They both cast science as sort of another arm of propaganda, too, which again leads to the question of what are they propagandizing? Are they,
Mhm.
in the case of cosmology, are they trying to limit um, what we are allowed to even contemplate? And if so, for what reason? Is there an agenda behind that, or have they planted their flag and they're too embarrassed to unplant the flag and plant it someplace completely different?
Yeah. You're speaking about a spectrum that I've been wondering about for a long time in all these disciplines. Is it innocent ignorance that's being propagated, or is there intentional ignorance propagated? And my guess is that it's a mixture. And my guess is that the majority of people propagating these narratives are doing so innocently because they've been taught it. and they built their career around it. And it's too much to think that they were that wrong. And I also want to caveat this whole discussion with the approach that I've taken, which is more about trying to disprove a theory that's been put forth by the mainstream, meaning poking holes in where they're saying specific things as positive claims and we're asked to believe it and saying, actually, that's not true, versus saying, Chris, I know with certainty what the correct model is. I actually find myself in the place of, I actually am not sure. And the same goes for medicine. Human biology is very complex. To understand why exactly a symptom emerges, that's a complex topic. And there's some good theories, but each situation probably requires its own set of analysis. Same thing with cosmology. For many reasons, we actually can't even know the exact nature of where we live because of observational um, inability to observe certain things from above. We can't even dig down that far. Earth's core is supposed to be roughly 4,000 miles down because Earth, as a sphere, is supposed to have a radius value of roughly 4,000 miles. The farthest digging expedition ever is under 8 miles.
Yep.
I mean, so these are just examples where we literally don't know enough to have a full model, and so uh, that is also leading me to your question around maybe the propagandizing among those who do know the truth, is that we end up getting so stuck in one rabbit hole and putting all the funding towards it, whether it's virology, whether it's trying to understand dark matter, which might not even exist. All the funding and energy is going in one direction, and it's taking away from funding and energy going towards these other directions that might be able to help us understand the truth and actually get to a model. So that does make me think that there might be some agenda here. I don't know exactly how it works. It might be multidimensional in that there are higher intelligences that might not even be physical influencing our world. But all of the narratives that seem to be falsehoods, and this starts with my first book, and End to Upside Down Thinking, challenging the idea that the brain produces consciousness, that we're more than our bodies. That's a massive shift. It changed my whole life. Versus the materialist view, which is what I was taught, and most of us are taught that we're just a body, and when you die, that's the end. It's a very disempowering perspective. And this is the view of everything. Upside down liberty, the idea that we should offload our authority to this government figure, this compulsory political monopoly, very disempowering. Germ theory, very disempowering. There are these microscopic organisms that are out to get you. You can try your best, but it might kill you. It's the invisible enemy, very disempowering. And this cosmology stuff, the idea that we are a spinning ball in a vast, almost infinite vacuum that is the result of a 13.8 billion year ago event, the Big Bang. We're hopelessly spinning around, revolving around the sun at over 60,000 miles an hour. And it's just a vast infiniteness. We're just a little speck. We're not very significant, and we're
Random.
one of many.
Yes. Random and meaningless. Yeah.
Yes.
It's lucky we're even here, you know? Yeah.
Right.
It does cast a sort of a bleak context for the human species, as if we're only here just because the right set of circumstances arose, and and we came from the primordial goo, for lack of a better term.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very, very disempowering, and I think, like government, like medicine, like all these things that try and keep our potential in boxes. Um, I don't know. Is it a desire to control the masses? Is a desire to keep us ignorant, while they have the real knowledge and operate behind the scenes? Atheism is the predominant philosophy. It seems like these days, at least in the West.
Hmm.
Whereas a lot of people propagating that, I'm not sure whether they buy that themselves. I think that a lot of people who push forward the narrative of materialism, in many cases, know that there's something else, but they're not letting us have access to that knowledge or that data.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a story told by Mario Beauregard. He's a neuroscientist. He talked about studying spiritual phenomena at a top neurological institute in Canada, or he wanted to study spiritual phenomena from a scientific perspective. He was told by the head of the organization, "You will never study these phenomena as long as I'm alive." And his conclusion was that this is social engineering,
That science was social engineering.
that what he was experiencing, which is a
Oh,
microcosm
I
of
see
what
what you're
many
saying.
academics,
Yes.
that it was social engineering, that at the very top of these institutions, they will block certain things from getting out there. And
Yes.
what have we seen elsewhere? For example, Rupert Sheldrake's TED Talk, which
Yeah.
talks about spiritual phenomena, Graham Hancock, and many others like it, we see this everywhere, the suppression.
It's so strange because they're happening in fields of endeavor and fields of study where many people think that they're flawless. Like they trust them unquestioningly, and we saw that during the COVID bullshit. Is that don't trust the science,
Mhm.
which basically trust the system. Um, and that's not how science works. Science is not a faith-based endeavor. It's something that sets out to try and establish some facts, and then continue to contemplate the possibilities of where that could go, and what all may or may not be taking place in any given situation. And that often does not seem to be what's actually happening in science. It's all
No,
about who
you're right.
funds it.
Yes, who funds it? And then that becomes the new religion, which is an
Yes.
anti-scientific perspective.
Yes.
I saw a post on social media the other day. I had to repost it. This was a US senator who took a snapshot of the new initiatives in RFK's regime as head of HHS. And it said something to the effect of assess psychotropic drugs. Okay. In more complex language, but he used the word assess. And this senator said, what a denial of science. I can't believe there were people that supported RFK. And I commented on it. I said, it's really interesting that to assess something is a denial of science when science is all about questioning and assessing. So they
Exactly.
distorted the definitions.
It's so insane. So insane. Yet that's like the new people don't even question that attitude. It's like it's science, or science in quotes, scientism has taken this emotional righteousness about it, and so much so that it's above even looking into certain things because of course that's ridiculous. Of course those things don't exist, which is so enraging. I mean, it's not like science is disappointing me. I've always been suspicious of science, but then I come to realize that really I'm suspicious of corporate mainstream science,
Mhm.
science that's compromised. True science and true scientists like Rupert Sheldrake are actually doing stuff. Robert Temple, we just had him on. I don't know if you're familiar with his book, The New Science of Heaven. Amazing stuff. He
Mhm.
states that the whole idea that it's a molecular universe that we live in is erroneous, and it's not really based on anything, and that actually it's a plasmic universe. At the very least, 98% of our universe is plasma,
Mm.
and that the sun is not this burning hydrogen bomb of heat, but it's actually much closer and much cooler than you would imagine. So many mind fucks as far as all the things that we take for granted. And he's very irreverent and he's got a great sense of humor. I highly recommend you looking into him. I think you'd really appreciate his viewpoints.
Yes, and I think we need more of that to challenge the assumptions we've been told and really ask when a positive claim is put forward as being true, we should be able to ask, how did you arrive at that? What are the assumptions underlying it? And what
Exactly.
I'm finding is every time I do this, I realize the assumptions are very shaky.
For sure. And it says something too that they're so resistant to the mere questioning. It's not like somebody's beating their chest and saying everything that you're stating is wrong, but just asking questions, and that's enough to get everybody up in arms. That's a red flag right there.
Yeah, if we can't ask questions, there's a problem. That's a good pattern to notice.
For sure. Absolutely. So what okay, so the all the stuff that you found out when you were unearthing the medical industrial complex and how questionable that science was behind that organically led you into, because a lot of those people were also questioning the cosmos too. So what did you come up with anything, or did you just come up with a more a bigger cluster of questions that
Mm.
you want to look into as time goes on?
Yeah, certainly, this whole exploration has raised more questions than answers
Yes, for
because now
sure.
I'm questioning everything I see in the sky. What is it? How far away is it? What is it really made of? Is it a burning gas ball or is it something else?
Yeah,
And what I try to do, like I've done in all my books, is compiled the research and ideas of many other people who came before me. But I try to put it in a way so that people can concisely absorb the information and at least frame it in a accurate way. I see this with so many areas, but especially in medicine and cosmology, where, for example, if you question the existence of viruses, the knee jerk reaction, even among very open minded people who are questioning many other things, they'll say, well, I was just at home and my kid got sick, and then the rest of us got sick at home. So, how could you be questioning viruses? Because we're not really trained in logical thinking to say, just because we observe something doesn't tell us the cause of the observation. We saw wet grass doesn't mean it rained, for example. So, it's trying to lay that out. I try to explicit before getting into too much of the cosmology and the physics in the book, try to establish some of these fallacies, but also try to establish because, and I'll give the medicine analog first. Um, there's this presupposition that we have it pretty well understood. So how could we be that wrong? Because Mark, you're asserting that we're just completely wrong. That germ theory is not right. Are you kidding me? But if you look at it, have we gotten much better at treating people? I mean, we have certain treatments that we didn't have a long time ago, but chronic illness is going through the roof. People are getting sick all over the place, and we don't really know what's going on. We just had an alleged pandemic, and people were getting sick, and they were taking injections, and they were still getting sick. Clearly, we're missing something big. So don't tell me that we have it figured out. Same thing with cosmology. We can start with two basic things that should make everyone question all of it. Mainstream physicists tell us that 96% of the universe is made of dark matter and dark energy. And the remaining 4% is this baryonic matter that we do understand. So, by mainstream physicist standards, we don't understand the vast majority of reality. And maybe that 96% doesn't even exist. Maybe it was just plugged in to prop up current theories. That's point number one, huge problem. Point number two, mainstream physics acknowledges that the two leading theories of physics, Einstein's relativity, which works with big scale items like galactic scale stuff, it's Einstein's gravity, basically, is essentially incompatible with quantum theory, the other major theory. Metaphorically speaking, the equations blow up when you try to combine relativity and quantum. So we don't have a unified theory that can explain the two leading theories and even reconcile them. So, on its face, physics is missing huge things. And when I hear people say, just like in medicine, but Mark, we have it pretty well figured out. We can explain so much with the heliocentric model, Earth revolving around the sun and a big bang, and Earth is spherically shaped. We can explain everything. We can explain observations in the sky and so forth. What they're missing, they're overlooking is, well, they're saying, "Grant me these few miracles, and then I can explain everything. Grant me
Yeah.
dark matter, dark energy,
Yeah,
and no
exactly.
unified theory, and then I can explain everything to you." They don't wanna talk about that.
Yep.
So, we should be having this question because the mainstream is admitting the foundations are broken.
Mhm. That's a good point because those are the major building blocks that the launching pad that all of this other madness comes from, and we just gotta have faith in that. The Big Bang always sounded crazy to me. I mean, no crazier than the Garden of Eden or any of that stuff. It's like, why is that outrageous and that is perfectly acceptable, you know? They're just a bunch of mathematical equations that are trying to point at something that there's no way that they can have evidence for, true evidence for. It's all conjecture. Yet it's not necessarily, I'm not saying necessarily that the scientists themselves are beating their chests and getting self righteous about it. It's the people who regurgitate that stuff as if it was some religious doctrine, and we, especially in the COVID thing, but especially like, if you mention the words flat earth, you get laughed out of any place that you're at. But
Right.
based on what? Like what is so ridiculous about that? Other,
Yeah.
and so I mean, do you have any ideas about? I mean, do you think flat Earth? Do you think strangely shaped Earth? Do you think what have you come up with anything? Are you any closer to any idea?
Well, I'll put it this way. The model put forth is very specific, right? Currently by mainstream science. Earth is a spherically shaped object. In other words, it's an oblate spheroid. That's the more specific term. It's pear shaped because of some bulging at the equator. And the radius value at the equator is roughly 4,000 miles. So there's very specific geometry that's put forth. And Earth is supposedly rotating at over 1,000 miles an hour, or roughly 1,000 miles an hour at the equator, which is faster than the speed of sound. At the poles on the sphere, it's moving much more slowly in terms of its rotation on a tilted axis. It's revolving around the sun in a free fall state at over 60,000 miles an hour. It is moving around the Milky Way galaxy at over 500,000 miles an hour. And this is all happening in an expanding universe because we're expanding after the Big Bang and we are moving at over 1,000,000 miles an hour in that expansion. So that's the model that we've been told, even though we directly experience zero of those things. including the spherical curvature. We never observe spherical curvature in our daily life. We never feel motion in our daily life. Doesn't mean it's true, but that's just the way we wouldn't necessarily believe this stuff if there weren't scientists telling us there are complex equations and organizations claiming that they can see things that we can't, and then they always give us CGI images and so forth. So we don't have the direct evidence. Um, and I think there are many things that can invalidate that model, where there are certain observations that could be explained, for example, on if Earth were a topographical plane, i.e., flat. I don't know if it is or not because, for example, we can't dig down far enough. We don't have enough independent verification from above us. We'd want to have a lot of people taking video footage of the full sphere. We don't even have NASA showing us a full sphere. We have circular disc shaped pictures sometimes that are often composites, but we don't have this a ball doing a full motion. There are also restrictions in terms of what we can observe on Earth itself. There are restrictions around the North Pole. And as I discuss in my book, a lot of restrictions in Antarctica. The 1959 Antarctic Treaty has restricted access. And your audience might be saying, well, have been to Antarctica and there was just the final experiment that everyone's talking about. Yes, some people can go to parts of Antarctica, but that would be like saying, well, I visited San Francisco and therefore I know all about North America. We need real exploration of all these different places in Antarctica. And I quickly want to touch on this final experiment because it got so much press. This was where people who believe in flat Earth and other people who believe in a globe, the majority of them were globe believers, went to Antarctica to see if they could observe a 24-hour sun in the sky, and they did observe that. And the idea was that this observation fits the globe model, and therefore it debunks flat Earth. And that's a flawed set of reasoning for a number of reasons. Number one, it's not a final experiment. It is a single observation. There's a big difference. They observe something in the sky, and seeing something in the sky tells us nothing about the ground beneath our feet. If you look at the ceiling, does that tell you about the floor? Again, so like there are a lot of leaps of logic here. And while the observation does match what you would expect on the globe model, it's like seeing wet grass. Maybe there's another explanation other than rain. And there are some alternative explanations I've seen, and I'm not going to say these are correct, where there's a flat Earth model and you do have a 24-hour sun because of the way the light bends through the firmament in a superfluid medium. Joseph
Mhm.
Hanvey has a YouTube channel where he actually shows a 24-hour sun within a firmament enclosed Earth. I'm not going to claim any of that stuff. What I'm trying to say, and this is a long-winded way of getting there, is that we have such little access to Antarctica, and who knows what else on Earth. We would need, if we wanted to have a model of Earth, we would need to map all this stuff out. So like, I do think there are things that work on a topographical plane, and this notion of it comes up in ether cosmology a lot. This is the term that's being used, where Earth is a topographical plane that serves as this inertial block domain wall using technical terminology. And there's a toroidal field that goes through the middle. So Earth is like a circle. Antarctica is not an island at the bottom of a sphere, which is the conventional model. Antarctica is an ice wall around the circle. Who knows what's beyond the ice wall? Maybe there are other lands, who knows? But at the center of the circle, the circular lake is the North Pole, and that's where the toroidal field would go through it. I think it's very interesting, but I'm not going to latch on to one thing because there's so many question marks. And I'll just give one example before pausing here that just raised eyebrows for me when I first heard it, that there are many examples of long distance observations that violate globe geometry, some of which were put forth in a lawsuit that a globe skeptic won. And the,
Really?
the judge, yeah, so I discussed this in the book where this man, Zen Garcia, put out a challenge to see if anyone could prove that Earth is spherically shaped or moves. And someone submitted some evidence and they went to court over it because the guy said, well, no, I did present you with evidence. And then Zen Garcia said, no, you did. And the court sided with Zen Garcia. And I don't think there was a formal like ruling saying he believes Earth is flat, but in Zen Garcia's court pleadings, he presented a number of examples of seeing too far, where basically people could see things in the distance that should be blocked by Earth's curvature if it has a certain radius value of roughly 4,000 miles at the equator. So it's like if you're on one part of the ball, by definition, you wouldn't be able to see things on the other side of the ball because it's blocked by the physical curve in the same way that you wouldn't be able to see around a bend. Physically impossible because there's mass blocking it. And yet people repeatedly are able to see things that they shouldn't be able to see based on the Earth's um, curvature geometry. So, what does that mean? Does that mean that Earth is flat? Well, it certainly means that Earth doesn't have the radius value that we've been told if these observations are accurate. The globe model's explanation will always be, and they say it's just refraction. So you're seeing a mirage and the light is bending. and that's why you see it. It's not actually there. That's their counter argument. Many people would say that's just a they're just trying to make something up. But it is possible, just if we are only looking at these long distance observations, that Earth is a bigger sphere than we've been told, has a bigger
Yeah,
radius value.
exactly.
Possible. If that were true, that would still mess up all of physics because the Earth's mass is dependent on its radius. And if we use the theories of gravity, which is what mainstream physics does, then Earth would have a much bigger uh, gravitational force. If it's bigger, has a bigger radius value, which would mess up all of cosmology because then its distance to this relative to the moon and the sun, all that would have to change. So those are very damning examples. And I want to just mention this. I would love to see the data, but Austin Whitsitt, who was one of the flat Earth believers who went to Antarctica for this alleged final experiment, I heard him say on two of his webinars that they did long distance observations there and they saw things that should have been blocked by curvature. So it's funny that the final experiment has been branded as the end of the flat Earth when in fact it might be the end of the globe if Austin's observations are accurate.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know how those things could be mirages in the distance when if you have a strong enough camera and you're watching a ship go into the distance, like how is it going to turn into a mirage? Like it's going to remain a ship in the same place. I mean, maybe if the mirage popped up somewhere else, then it's like, oh, where the hell did that come? It must be a mirage or something. But if you're watching it as it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller, that I don't know. I just that doesn't seal it for me. And the pilots, not they would have to constantly be steering their planes downwards if they were going over the curvature of an Earth, or of a
Yeah, well,
globe.
it's interesting. Before I even knew I was going to write this book last year, I met a pilot who just volunteered this information to me. He said, I've been a commercial pilot for over 2 decades. I never once had to adjust for Earth's spherical shape or its motion. And
Interesting.
I taught pilots for years, and I never taught them to adjust for curvature or motion. And he says, I don't think Earth is a spinning ball. Most pilots ignore this. And he said, like 95% of them just ignore any contradictions to the spinning globe model and they'll say they believe it. But he said there is this small percentage where they acknowledge that Earth is not a spinning globe and they all kind of acknowledge each other quietly, but it's too controversial to talk about.
It's so strange. And by design, I think too. That's like
Yeah.
number one on the nutso list is flat Earth. I don't know
Yes.
what would chemtrails would probably be right under that, just which always is that's a red flag in and of itself. If something is so stigmatized as the most ridiculous idea ever known to humankind, then there's a good chance there's something there.
In this one, I mean, I can understand why people would be upset about medicine because, in their view, they might say you're giving dangerous misinformation and people will die. So I can at least understand the chain of logic. With regard to the shape of Earth or where we live, why is that harmful?
Yeah.
It's not, other than what I hear people say is, well, then you're just teaching people not to believe anything. But when you really think about it, do we know the cosmological model that we've been taught since we were all very little? Which is we're this little speck in a vast, near infinite vacuum. And there was some event, we don't understand it, but it started the universe in some unimaginably far away place 13.8 billion years ago. And now we observe things and we assume that it rained last night because we see wet grass about this thing 13.8 billion years ago in a faraway land. And we're going to tell you all about the universe and how we ended up in the solar system, even though we don't have the observations, like I said. And by the way, we don't have an observation of Earth in the alleged solar system in its location with the sun and all the other planets there. Because there's this presupposition that Earth is a planet like the other lights in the sky that we see, but that's a model that we've been indoctrinated with too. So if you let go of everything and say, what do we actually observe without putting any charge on it? We are here, we observe stuff in the sky, the things around us move around us, the sun moves across the sky, and then try to then say, what are all of these lights? Versus starting with the Big Bang and heliocentrism with sun at the center, Earth revolving around the sun, and Earth being this massive sphere floating in space and moving around in all these ways. We start with those presuppositions as if they're fact, rather than starting from scratch.
Yeah, and I think maybe people are at least when I think of, people describing a firmament, that doesn't sound like, to me, something that would organically happen in nature. It sounds like something constructed that and put it in place, which lends itself to the idea that we are in I don't know, it's like some sort of an environment that's maybe engineered by something way higher than us.
Mhm.
God, however you want to put it. But how does that ideas like that fly with you?
Yes, I agree with you that the notion of a firmament, and if your audience is not familiar with this, this term firmament comes from the Bible, actually. It speaks about separating the waters above, meaning that what we see in the sky is actually not a vacuum, it's some kind of fluid medium, and the waters below. And the firmament separates it. The waters below would be the oceans and all the water on Earth. And the idea that people are speculating about is that we are in some kind of enclosed thing, maybe a dome. We don't know what it is, but we're actually enclosed, and we don't know how high it is or where the enclosure stops. And that would speak to some kind of intelligence that is making that happen versus the Big Bang model of we're just a random speck. But we don't even have to go to the firmament to invoke potentially some kind of intelligence. This gets back to the debate about geocentrism versus heliocentrism. Geocentrism is that Earth occupies a special place at the center of the universe, versus heliocentrism, Earth revolves around the sun in one galaxy, in one massive universe. And what I was shocked to learn when I started researching was that mainstream physicists like Albert Einstein and Stephen Hawking and Fred Hoyle, I quote them all in my book, they acknowledge that when we observe things in the sky above us, we actually cannot distinguish whether Earth is at the center or Earth revolves around the sun. We cannot distinguish between geocentrism and heliocentrism. More technically speaking, heliocentrism and geocentrism are kinematically equivalent. So, why have we then moved toward heliocentrism? Because that takes us toward a godless random universe, basically, versus geocentrism. Because even if we're geocentric without a firmament, why would Earth be at the center? That invokes some kind of intelligence that maybe makes us here. And there's something known as the Copernican principle that has biased our scientists. There's a great documentary. It's on YouTube now by Robert Sungenis called "The Principle." He talks about the history of this. But basically, physicists have observed things and then force fit it into a heliocentric model because they want to believe that we do not occupy a special place in the cosmos. That's the Copernican principle. Stephen Hawking said, "We believe this on principles of modesty." Edwin Hubble, who's part of the expanding universe theory, which is related to the Big Bang, he used very strong language in his writings where he said it would be an unwelcome proposition. It would be a horror, intolerable, the idea that we occupy a special place. And therefore, the data he came up with, he fitted into an expanding universe where Earth was not at the center. So there was a philosophical preference that has biased academia for a long time. And then we've forgotten about the geocentric possibility and other ways of explaining these things. Why, which is, I think, where your question's going, is that if we occupy a special place, then maybe we're all much more significant than we realize. And maybe there's an intelligence that cares about us in some way, or at least has a vested interest in us. That blows away the materialist paradigm. And so there would be a vested interest in trying to keep us away from a geocentric perspective.
Yeah, man, that implies so much. Yeah, I think that humans are much, much more powerful and interconnected and capable of much, much more than we are given credit for. But I mean, it's when you learn how it is relatively so easy to sculpt these fields of study in particular directions, and so much so that it's like, okay, only experts past this point, and then we will tell you the story of how things are, and then you're not allowed to question them, nor are you allowed to think out of this specific these specific boundaries, like your material, you're here one time, it's all about whoever dies with the most toys wins, same
Yeah.
shit different day. Like, these are all things to beat us down and maybe accept our place in this machine that seems to benefit people that are I won't say above us because that makes it sound like they're superior, but they're in a position where they benefit from our ignorance.
That's how it feels. And I know the implications of that are pretty massive because then it raises questions about what's our true history. How do we get to this point of unimaginable ignorance about who we are, where we are, why we're here? Basically, the implication of this conversation is that those basic parts of our existence have been hidden from us, the answers to those questions. And I want to tie this also to the medical question because there's a parallel here again, that in the medical field, we're told to trust experts who are working with test tubes first of all, outside of a natural body setting, especially in virology, they're doing a bunch of stuff and they're inferring that there was a virus, but no one's ever seen a virus go into a host cell inside of a live body and cause disease and replicate and do all the things that we're told a virus does. They end up doing things in test tubes outside of the natural environment of the body and make inferences about what's going on. And we're just told to trust them. And then they do genetic sequencing in a computer and they do all sorts of things where they're patching things together. And we're just told, trust the scientists. They did it. You don't even know how to do this, people. You have to trust this. Same thing with cosmology. It's just on a massive scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
There, right? Because we can't directly observe these things
Exactly.
from where we sit, and
Yes.
we're asked to trust the experts who have done the math, and they know what's best for us, Chris.
Mhm.
And then we have a few agencies around the world where they have billions of dollars, like NASA has multi-billion-dollar budget a year, and they're going to show us little snippets, and we're going to be told that we need to listen to them and trust their inferences.
Yeah. And and the main argument that a lot of people have is how are all these people in on this? And it's like it's very simple. It's compartmentalized. Only the
Mhm.
people that need to be in on it are in on it. Everybody else is taking orders and doing what they're focusing on the little part of the bigger picture that they're being told to focus on, which
Yeah,
prevents them from seeing what is actually happening.
right. And often people are just taking in data that they're given. They don't necessarily know where the data came from. They might
Exactly.
be told that it came from some faraway place in the galaxy, for example, but like we're just told like you say, they're compartmentalized, don't necessarily know the big picture. I will say that in this exploration, that was the hardest part for me, was to think about the level of fraud and what are the mechanisms of the fraud? Is it possible that just a few people know and that most NASA employees and space agencies around the world, most people are innocent? I do think that's possible. But if let's just take ourselves back to like 1900 or something, before we were even close to this level of space exploration. Why would people believe in a spherically shaped Earth that's moving? And like, does the physics even support that? And they're just basic things beyond long distance observations that should make us question the narratives from space agencies because those space agencies operate from a very specific narrative based on specific physics. Issue number one that I can't find a way around this. Um, Earth is supposed to be an open system, meaning there's no enclosure, sitting next to this massive vacuum. It's nearly infinite vacuum that's growing because we live in an expanding universe. And the way pressure is supposed to work is if you open a soda can where there's higher pressure inside, the gases are all bouncing around in there and it's closed. When you open it up, it pops because there's something called diffusion. The gas, which is higher pressure inside, diffuses out to the lower pressure air around it and it reaches this homeostasis equilibrium, basically. So if we applied that to Earth, which is next to this extremely low pressure vacuum, unimaginably low pressure, and Earth has at least some pressure allegedly if gas is being held in, why is the gas not being violently sucked out? Because there's a differential, there's this pressure gradient of vacuum and Earth. The answer that we're told by scientists is that gravity somehow holds everything in. Even though gravity is supposed to be a weak force most of the time, and there are little bugs that can defy gravity and go up, there are lots of weird contradictions. But even like Stephen A. Young, I mentioned, who wrote A Fool's Wisdom, theoretical physics PhD, highly trained, this is something he talks about too, that you can't have an open pressure system next to a vacuum. There would have to be some kind of enclosure. And if that's true, then NASA's narrative is automatically highly problematic. That's point number one. Point number two, dark matter. What's interesting for me is that I started my first book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, mentioning dark matter and dark energy. And the point I was making was before getting into notions of consciousness and the possibility of an afterlife, is that look, we don't really know what's going on in the universe. 96% of the universe is dark matter and dark energy. Scientists will agree to that. What I didn't know is how did we get to this 96% number? Like, what was the origin story? And that's what I looked into in this book. Dark matter in particular is interesting because it was conceived in 1933 by Fritz Zwicky, an astronomer who observed things in a cluster of galaxies called the Coma cluster. He saw that basically um, the way things were moving did not align with the theory of gravity or Einstein's relativity. In other words, there wasn't enough mass there for things to be moving around in the way that he saw them under Einstein's relativity. And there was not just a little bit of missing mass, it was off by something like 99 plus percent.
Wow.
So there was this massive amount of mass that should have been there and it wasn't. And yet he was observing things that didn't make any sense under Einstein's gravity. So what's going on? To me, there were basically two options at the time. One, they could say we have to rethink all of physics, and maybe Einstein was wrong, and Newton. We have to go back, start from scratch, and understand motion, and try to figure out why the apple falls to the ground. Maybe it's not because of gravity. Maybe it's because something else. That was option one. Option two was, let's just say that we discovered dark matter, because obviously Einstein's right. So there must be some kind of matter there that we don't understand. Fast forward many decades, scientists have been looking into dark matter. This is one of the hottest areas in all of physics. And a group of physicists led by Pavel Krupa at the University of Bonn in Germany, he's a mainstream astrophysicist. He has his own Wikipedia page. He is saying, look, I've investigated this now for over 20 years with my colleagues, and we have falsified dark matter, meaning the predictions you would expect if dark matter existed do not occur. And we have falsified it with immense confidence, over 5 sigma confidence. That's 99.999 plus percent. And he says, so dark matter is not there. We have to rethink Einstein's gravity. And he was asked in an interview within the last few years about this. The interviewer said, so wait a second, we've falsified dark matter. And why are so many people looking into it? And what he said was that it is sociological pressures, that this is where the funding is going, this is where the prizes are won. And if you're in the field, you want to study dark matter.
It's so ridiculous. It's like, yeah, it's like something out of high school or something. Like, that's so unevolved, so ridiculous. And these are the people that are in charge of dispersing the narrative to us. It's such a crime. So I'm guessing you don't really buy the moon landing.
I don't know how I can.
Exactly.
How can I? I was forced into that because I was really resistant to saying, "Oh, wait, there's a massive conspiracy with the space agencies," because you can't have one without the other in this space. Once you question the physics, then the logical conclusion is that the space agencies aren't telling us the truth. So you're forced into massive conspiracy in this area.
Yeah.
And so I'm highly skeptical. I do think we send things up in the sky and we can send them up pretty high, but going out into space as a vacuum, which is how it's described by the space agencies, that would be physically impossible as we look at it. And especially if gravity has essentially been falsified, maybe there's another mechanism for how things move around, but then this people floating around in a vacuum might not be what we're told.
Yeah.
And maybe the moon isn't this thing that you land on 238,000 miles away, which I find it so coincidental that mainstream science will tell us the reason for an eclipse is that it just looks like the sun and the moon are roughly the same distance away and the same size, but that's because their relative sizes and distances are such that it just so happens that they look like they're the same size and distance, even though the sun is 93 million miles away. That's what we're told. So it just doesn't make sense. It makes way more sense to say maybe physics is wrong. Maybe the sun and moon are way smaller and way closer than we've been told. Maybe the lights in the sky are not these massive land masses that you can actually go onto and populate. Maybe there's something else, and it's all way more local.
Yes. Yeah. So even if there is not a firmament, even if I don't have dyslexia, uh, even if there's not a firmament, there's no way that we can make it past the Van Allen belt anyway, supposedly, because it's highly radioactive. But is the Van Allen belt the firmament? Like,
Right.
who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
And I want to add here that there are people like Bart Sibrel. He's probably the most
Yes.
famous moon landing critic. He believes in a spherical Earth, as far as I've come across with him. That he believes in mainstream cosmology, but has done a really good job of showing the holes in the moon landing narrative. And by the same token, there are people who believe in geocentrism, like Robert Sungenis and a physicist named Robert Bennett, he was in the lineage of Einstein. Basically, he wrote his thesis on relativity, and he's a proponent of geocentrism, but is not all the way at flat Earth. So you could believe in a spherical Earth that's at the center, and not believe that it's a topographical plane. You could believe the moon landing was not real, and also believe that Earth is a spinning globe. So there are these combinations. I personally think there are flaws in all of them, and it takes us away from the spinning globe. It takes us away from NASA's narrative. And a lot of these things, like you say, whether it's the Van Allen radiation belt or other things that we're told are one thing, might be basically analogs for something in another model, like a firmament or something like
Yeah, there's so many holes in the moon landing narrative. So many. I
it.
mean, a ridiculous amount of holes. We lost all the footage. We lost all of the data. We can't replicate that anymore. Like, we have no way of getting through the Van Allen belt. Well, how did you do it in the first place? Like, Yeah, Bart Sibrel's been on twice, but have you seen his documentaries? Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Yeah, great
Yeah,
stuff.
that's worth discussing because it shows the NASA astronauts on Apollo 11 faking the image of Earth through a transparency up against the window, speaking with some voice on the phone, which might be the intelligence agencies. And this was a set of tapes that were sent to Bart Sibrel. He apparently received a large pile of video from NASA, and just like the one at the bottom was this thing that said "not for public
Yeah,
consumption."
yes,
And the question is, was that accidentally put there, or did someone within NASA give him a wink? Now, and
exactly.
he wrote a book called Moon Man, which came out within the last few years, and he tells about what happened with the intelligence agencies, that they went after him, but then there were the good guys in the intelligence agencies that protected him. It's a very fascinating story.
Absolutely, yes, and it kind of like the way he puts it, it seems like there's just no holes in that I saw. I mean, there's so many things that really just make sense that go against the whole moon landing narrative that, it's I there's no way that I can even begin to believe that anymore.
Yeah, I agree with you. After having looked into it, there are too many holes. But then there's this other narrative that I hear, and actually a friend of mine reached out the other day. The other narrative is, yeah, there are anomalies in the moon missions, but it's because there are things on the moon and things on Mars that are indicative of advanced intelligence, and there might be conflicts with governments, or there might be things the governments want to hide, and that's the reason for all of that.
Like, that
Uh,
we're not going back and
that we're
reproducing
not
that?
going back is that
Gotcha,
we need to not have these whatever is going on with these intelligences that is being
gotcha.
hidden from us. So there,
Yeah.
I've heard these counter narratives all over the place, but it doesn't get rid of the anomalies in like we've talked about.
Yeah, yeah, it's so funny, and the reactions of the astronauts to Bart when he would suggest, like, "I want you to swear on this Bible that you've been to the moon," and, like, Buzz Aldrin punched him, and, all of this, like, a lot of them acted really violently, like,
Yeah.
with the point where he left a wireless mic inside of one of their houses as they were leaving, and they said something like the guy said to his son, like, "We're gonna have to call the CIA, and should we get him whacked, basically?" It's like, come on, those aren't the words of innocent people or people that don't know something that they're not telling us.
It's all very suspicious. And
Very.
when we look at the actual missions themselves, it was just a few men, and we're having to trust their what they came back with. No independent media, no independent sources. And so it's like Steve Young says in his book, A Fool's Wisdom, all of the stuff from NASA is unfalsifiable and unverifiable, which is an unscientific way of doing things. So we would need a lot of independent verifications of this stuff.
Absolutely. So why is Young, so sure that the Earth is flat? Is that what you said
Well,
earlier?
he's so sure that it's not a spinning globe,
Not a spinning globe, yeah.
not
What
a spinning globe.
what are
So
the
he goes through many of these. So he talks about the moon landings and these the problem with pressure that we discussed. Really, a lot of the same arguments that we hear from other
Okay.
people. And what he describes in the book is that when he first heard about flat Earth theory, he said, "This is so stupid. I'm just going to debunk this. I've got a PhD. It's going to be easy to do." And he spent years and started looking into it and realized I actually can't debunk this. And then he realized, okay, I have to rethink everything. And it's led him to rethink not just cosmology, but atomism itself, which is the belief that there are physical particles. So he doesn't think there's anything solid at all. And that he brings it not to plasma, but I wonder if it's related to the elements, the basic elements of earth, air, fire, water, and then ether as the fifth element. And that's what makes everything up, and we are superimposing a model of atomism where it's like very similar to cosmology. The electrons going around, those are inferences where electrons might be able to explain some, or even any subatomic particle could explain some of the experiments, but maybe there are other explanations that don't invoke matter that could explain some of these early experiments, which are more energetic or plasma like or elemental. And that's a really big problem because, and he describes it this way, that it's uh, if you don't have atomism, then you can't have gravity because gravity is based on mass. And if you don't have gravity, then heliocentrism is done, Earth revolving around the sun after a big bang. And if you don't have heliocentrism, which is a multi-billion year process, then Darwinian evolution, which is based on billions of years, then that's put into question. And Darwinian evolution is necessary for this germ theory of disease, where you have competitive uh, microbes that have to attack things. So you start by questioning atomism, and then that takes you through all these other potential psyops in science.
Well, going back to the Big Bang Theory, what are the origins of the Big Bang Theory and what are the inconsistencies of it?
Yeah, good question. So it starts. A lot of it comes from Edwin Hubble, who, as I mentioned before, observed basically observed things that he said, and he didn't want to fit it into a geocentric model. So he came up with this expanding universe idea. I'm trying to simplify it, where basically if you had a balloon and you blow up the balloon, if you like put with a marker little dots all over that balloon, as you blow up the balloon, each of those dots becomes farther and farther away from each other because you're actually blowing up, you're expanding the surface. And he came up with a model sort of like that we live in this expanding universe. And that was a way to keep Earth from being in the center. And then from that idea, there was this notion of a Big Bang. And one of the big pieces of evidence for the Big Bang that people talk about, it's known as the cosmic microwave background. And this is something anyone can look up on Google. There's a map of it. I remember when I was an undergrad at Princeton and taking like an introductory astrophysics course, this was something they put up on the screen because one of the observations was done in Princeton, New Jersey. Big deal, cosmic microwave background. And this is supposed to be the evidence, Chris, that there was a Big Bang. This is the residual radiation that we see that they are inferring came from a Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. The problem is that in order for Earth to be not at the center, we would expect the cosmic microwave background to be homogeneous and also not having a preferred direction. Terms isotropic, but there are these little anomalies. And I remember learning about this in school, and they were trying to like brush aside the anomalies, but the anomalies are that actually it's not fully homogeneous and there is a preferred direction. And the preferred direction is that it points toward Earth. And one of these observations is known as the axis of evil in physics.
Interesting.
Because why is it evil that maybe it points toward Earth
Uh-huh.
as being in the center? And that really blows apart a lot of what we've been told about the Big Bang. And there are a number of other galactic observations. And in the book, I quote peer reviewed science of people saying, wait a second, this actually puts into question the Copernican principle that Earth doesn't occupy a special place. So it's this common theme of wanting to dismiss anomalies because we know that it rained last night. We saw wet grass. So obviously it rained. It wasn't due. So we're gonna force our observations into this model that it rained, i.e., there was a Big Bang and it's heliocentric and we're in a sphere. Um, the analogy that I use is if there's a law that says all swans are white, that's the law. We find a million white swans, and one day we find a single black swan. The law has been violated because the law says all swans are white. So the model is wrong. There needs to be a new model to accommodate this black swan. But that we don't see that in modern science. We say, well, it's good enough. And AI is really good at this too, like ChatGPT and Google's Gemini. When you talk to them about this stuff, they try to finagle it so much. No, Mark, we've got it. We were pretty accurate. There's a convergence of evidence. It's pretty close. And it's like, no, no, no. You have a model that's supposed to be able to predict everything, and there's an inconsistency. That means the model is wrong by definition and mainstream everything, science, politics, doesn't like to think that way. So what I try to do, I'm realizing now and psychoanalyzing myself in these books, is harping on the anomalies and say, no, we can't forget about those anomalies. We can't forget about the near death experiences where people are accurately seeing things from above their body when their brain is basically off. That should never happen. Don't
Yeah,
dismiss these anomalies.
exactly.
And it's the same thing in cosmology.
Anomalies are what we need to be focusing on and why we are defining them as anomalies in the first place.
Yeah,
Most likely, they're not anomalies at all. They're just something that we won't accept into the fold of our way of looking at things. So it seems like an aberration when really it's just probably a normal occurrence. We just don't take it into account or see it as such.
right. And then we end up doing things like creating the term paranormal,
Yes.
which presupposes that we know what normal is.
Yeah,
And actually,
exactly.
all these paranormal phenomena are actually totally normal if we have a new metaphysics.
Yes.
Another point I want to make on the Big Bang, just going back to that for a second.
Mhm.
In order to make the Big Bang idea work, there are some anomalies, basically, little things that don't quite match. And one of them is rapid expansion or inflation at the early universe, 13.8 billion years ago. So physicists have theorized a particle, an inflaton particle that must have been there to help with this inflation. This is like dark matter, dark energy, viruses. It's a reification fallacy. It's creating the existence of something, an abstraction that's never been found, and then speaking about it over and over again as if it's real, which
Yeah.
reinforces its existence.
Mhm. like a mantra. Like we just keep saying this over and over again, then you'll keep saying it over and over again,
Yeah.
and then you'll start making fun or shaming people that don't say it over and over again. Yeah, it's like a spell almost. You mentioned earlier ether as a fifth element. What is ether? How are we defining that? And why is it no longer acknowledged as such?
Yeah. It's a good question in terms of defining it because I've heard people speak about it differently, and I wonder if it has some relation to plasma, depending on how one defines that. But ether, I understand it as basically the backdrop of our reality. That light, mass, anything that we observe, maybe even plasma, derives from the ether, and ether is just excited in different ways, and then it looks like mass, it looks like light, it looks like other things. So it is the substrate of reality. The way I think about it now, because it ties into my more spiritual work that I started with an end to upside down thinking, maybe it's the spiritual interface between consciousness and the manifestation in the physical world.
Oh, yeah.
That would make sense. And ancient cultures talked about ether. Then your question is, well, why is it no longer part of mainstream science? And this goes back to studies that were done in the 1800s. In particular, there's a study called, it's known as Aries failure, but some would call it Aries success. And another is known as Michelson-Morley. That's a really famous one in 1887. There's technical stuff involved here. And in my book, I cite some scientists who validate what I'm about to say, but also I would recommend checking out Robert Bennett's work, who I mentioned before. He's done some webinars with Austin Whitsitt on Whitsitt Gets It YouTube channel, like technical physics lectures to go into more detail relative to what I'm saying. But again, he wrote his PhD thesis on relativity, Einstein's relativity. His, I hope I'm getting this right, his mentor worked with directly with someone who worked with Einstein directly, something like that. There's a direct lineage to Einstein. And he's saying both with Aries failure, which he believes is Aries success, and the Michelson-Morley study, these studies were basically interpreted such that Earth moves and there is no ether. When the alternative possibility was to interpret the studies as Earth is stationary and the ether exists. Why did this happen? It seems like there was this presupposition that Earth moves. So they weren't even questioning that. So they were forced into creating this observation to essentially get the ether out. And then, even with Michelson Morley, 1887, one of the excuses that was made was that the measuring devices shrank. And that's how they got the observations,
Hmm.
which brings in Einstein's relativity, because Einstein's relativity is about how space and time actually can dilate and shrink depending on other factors.
Yeah, yeah.
So Einstein's relativity in some ways was born out of an interpretation of Michelson-Morley, and that's led us on this path which eliminated the ether and has led us to believe many other things. So just like with virology, where there were assumptions made a long time ago, like the 1954 Enders and Peebles study, which led us to come up with a mode of quote unquote virus isolation, which is not actually isolation because they don't separate the virus from everything else. They just see an effect and it's in a cell culture soup and they assume a virus was there. Most people aren't looking back at the assumptions of these early studies. They just presuppose, oh, they figured it out decades ago. Just like with cosmology, oh, they figured it out, they got rid of the ether. But when you really look at it, you hear Robert Bennett speak about this and Steve Young and others, it's like, whoa, there was another possibility here, and maybe it makes more sense.
Hmm. What are some of the inconsistencies of Newtonian physics? And I think that they're also, we're talking about spell and word magic. Uh, the laws of physics makes it sound like it's something that is, you can't. There's no way to push against that. But what are some of the inconsistencies?
The one that I like to talk about most with Newtonian physics, and so for your audience's benefit, Newtonian physics comes from Isaac Newton, where basically he was trying to understand, why does an apple fall to the ground? You drop an apple, it does fall to the ground. And we've now basically Newton came up with the idea that mass is attracting mass. So there's some mystical force when you have a big massive thing like Earth, that it attracts the apple to it because it's much bigger than the apple. And so the apple falls down. And it's colloquially known as law. The problem is that there are some inconsistencies, one of which is Mercury's motion around the sun in the sky is not predicted by Newton's laws. So to me, we found our black swan, we've got an anomaly. Newton's stuff doesn't work. And if you ask AI about this, it will defend Newton and say, well, Newton's laws work very well in local circumstances and it can explain things very well in these few conditions. Still, it can't explain something as basic as Mercury's motion in the sky. So clearly, it's not right. And it did lead to Einstein's relativity, which is supposed to be a revised version of Newton's gravity. The revision is that it's not mass is attracting mass, like Newton said. It's actually that mass is bending and warping space time. So it looks like mass is attracting mass, but in the same way as if you put a medicine ball on a trampoline, it will bend the trampoline. And that's sort of like space time. And when you have this complex set of interactions with mass all over the universe, you get these perfect, you get the universe we're in now, where things are rotating around other things and so forth. I mentioned one of the problems with Einstein's gravity, which is that it needs dark matter to be there in order for it to work, and dark matter's been falsified, which has this cascading effect of effectively falsifying gravity, meaning we've got to think of another reason that the apple falls to the ground. But also Robert Bennett, the physics PhD I mentioned, who was well versed in relativity, speaks about some inconsistencies. One of which was shocking to me, was that special relativity, which is a subset of general relativity, treats light differently than general relativity. And he has more of these too. I think there's something around the term ether that Einstein conceived of. It's not the ether that we were speaking of, it's more of like a stationary ether. I don't remember exactly how it works, but the same thing where special and general relativity treat ether differently. That's impossible. If you have a theory and a subset of the theory is not consistent with the overall theory, that means there's an
Yeah,
inconsistency. And Robert
exactly.
Bennett says these two can't work together. Not
Interesting.
to mention, Chris, going back to the early part of our conversation, it does not reconcile Einstein's gravity with quantum theory, which is the other major theory, which a lot of people are questioning too. So when I hear people say, Mark, it all works so well, why would you question such basic things? It doesn't work so well.
Yeah, it doesn't at all. Crazy.
And by the way, you need gravity in order to hold the oceans on a ball. We've got oceans that are sticking onto a ball, not falling off because allegedly of gravity. So when I work with AI, which I've been doing a lot in the last year, I get it to try to confess to non-mainstream ideas. Because if you ask AI right now, ChatGPT, do viruses exist and cause disease? It will say absolutely. If you ask it, is Earth a spinning ball? It will say yes. But if you present it with certain facts and logic, you can get it to change its mind. So I got it to go through this issue of dark matter, basically saying, what's the relationship between dark matter and the spinning globe model of Earth? And at first, it will say the two things are not related. But when you walk it through, which is that, well, actually, dark matter only was derived because of a flaw in Einstein's gravity. There was missing mass per Zwicky 1933, and Einstein's relativity was needed to cover up for the flaws in Newton's gravity. And you need gravity in order to hold the oceans on a ball. If you falsify dark matter, what's the cascade of events? And eventually it will say that a spinning globe is impossible because dark matter has been falsified. And I find that interesting.
It's fantastic. That's ingenious. Or you could, I mean, does an AI respond to, well, prove it then? If it's confessing something as a fact, can you then push back on that? Does it respond to that?
It will. And some AIs respond differently. I find Google's the most resistant, but if you phrase it properly and push back enough, it is programmed to defend the mainstream. So
Interesting.
with virology, for example, it will say things like, you're right, it is very difficult to isolate a virus, to truly isolate it and separate it from other things. And then I'll say, well, if you say it's difficult, you're implying that it's been done. And then it will admit, oh, yeah, I was actually just hedging with that language. So it will
Oh,
hedge to protect the consensus.
crazy. Wow. That's really fascinating. And what one do you usually use? You use Google and what else?
I like to use Google's AI, which is Gemini. There's another called Claude by Anthropic.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
ChatGPT. I also use DeepSeek. And when I do these exercises, I like to do it across all the AIs to see the way that they
Yeah.
respond and the
Uh-huh.
differences. But with all the stuff, whether it's cosmology, virology, I get them all to flip
Mm,
eventually, that
that's
they will
great.
depart from consensus.
That's fantastic. I like that. Let's see. You point out in the book that questioning the shape of the earth is not a new idea. What do you think reignited this whole conversation?
Yeah, it's really an ancient cosmology. All the ancient cultures around the world believed in a flat, stationary Earth, topographical plane. And by the way, they were able to make many predictions accurately, including predicting the eclipses. So they knew something. And then we moved into this model. I believe it came from like the classics, like Plato and others like that, who spoke about the sphere. as this perfect shape. I've even had people in the modern era say to me, Mark, look in nature, the sphere is like a preferred geometry. Like that is not scientific evidence of
Yeah,
that's a
exactly.
philosophical preference for a
Yes.
shape. But um, there has been opposition to the sphere model that we saw in like the 1800s, and there have been organizations since then throughout the 1900s that have questioned the shape. But then there seems to have been a divergence, and I go through this history a bit in the book, where we now have groups like, for example, the Flat Earth Society, which many globe skeptics do not agree with with all the things that come out of the Flat Earth Society, and they wonder if there's a psyop within the let's just say the globe skeptic community, those who question cosmology, where there are some people that come in or organizations that give elements of truth, but then say other things that are absurd to try to discredit the movement.
Exactly.
And it's important to acknowledge that some people, when they hear flat Earth, they think of a pancake floating in space, revolving around the sun like other planets. And they'll say, oh, these flat earthers, they'd fall off the edge. They don't know what they're talking about. What most people don't understand is that that's not the model that many people speak of or the framework. They're speaking about some kind of a topographical plane that may extend out who knows how far. We don't know because we can't observe it, but that everything is revolving around us. So it's not that we're lined up around the sun, revolving around the sun. No, it's a topographical plane. So there are these ways of injecting false narratives to confuse what should be open questions regarding cosmology. And I think that has poisoned the well over time.
Yeah. I think people don't realize the other side of acknowledging gatekeepers. Like gatekeepers, okay, if you don't want to think about hard problems, then you can look to your gatekeeper and they will give you all the answers to the questions that you are willing to accept. But they can also keep things behind the gate that they don't want you to see. And it fascinates me. There's a theory that the whatever, flat earth, whatever, that the surface of it is much, much larger than we
Right.
have been told, and that there may be other territories that, are very substantial, and maybe even where aliens or extraterrestrials, what we call those things, or gods come from, are these other places. That fascinates me a lot. What have you did you come across, things like that when you were doing your research?
Yeah, I've heard some allegations of this, and I mentioned a few books in my book where people allege that they went past the ice wall and they went to other lands and saw stuff and saw civilizations. But again, that's unverifiable. We need to have a lot of independent replications of that. And it's super tough to do because of the Antarctic Treaty and also because the conditions in Antarctica are very brutal to be able to sail a ship down there. We're also in a place of deficiency because we don't have airships anymore. The Hindenburg explosion basically got rid of airships and they were deemed to be too dangerous, but it would be much easier to independently travel if we had airships versus planes, which require very specific kinds of landing environments. And so, because of that, we don't really know the answer to it. And it would be very dangerous to try to find out. So, while I'm open to it, I'm in this place of like, I don't want to claim something without direct evidence for it. And while we
Exactly.
have these few people that have tried to claim it, interesting, but we need more evidence, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Totally. Going back to RFK was brought up earlier. What do you think about his new position in the administration?
Hmm. Net positive is my knee jerk versus any other person I could think of who would be head of HHS. He has gone back on some statements, like when he was in the Senate hearing or the congressional hearing, he said something to the effect of, I support the childhood vaccination schedule. I believe it was when he was speaking to Elizabeth Warren. And I don't know how much of this is political posturing, where in order to get in, he basically had to make concessions. And he's not going to go after everything, but he'll go after some things that most HHS directors wouldn't. I know a lot of people in the virus germ theory skepticism community who are very skeptical of RFK and others because they don't seem very interested in the virus discussion. And if there is no virus and if bacteria don't cause disease, if bacteria are actually helpers that help you clean up underlying toxicity, then why would you need a vaccine? So this would really upset the pandemic industrial complex. This would get to the root of it if you explore germ theory. And RFK hasn't wanted to do that as much. So I know people are skeptical of him for that. I really don't know what to think because I could understand from his perspective, the low hanging fruit is we're injecting poison into people. Let's explore that and let's try to take away some of the liability protection from these organizations. And then we can work from there. versus trying to get to the root cause because that's just too hard for people to believe. So I hear all these arguments. I think let's wait and see.
Yeah.
That's where I am.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about the selection of Trump rather than the election?
Yeah. As you know, I'm very skeptical of government.
Yeah,
I
same
wrote the
here.
book An
Same
End
here.
to Upside Down Liberty, which is a
Yes.
pro voluntarism.
Yes.
I think a
Yes.
lot of what's coming out with Trump is more positive than what we saw in the last 4 years, like showing government inefficiency. I'm all for that and exposing that the media has been lying. Like that's all really good. But let's see what happens.
And
I
the
mean, we still
gender
have
the gender issue too.
fighting some of the woke stuff and making, I do think it's having the effect within American society, but probably all over the world where people feel more empowered to speak out when they see weird things. Whereas before it's like you had to be quiet because you would be called a racist or something. Now people are coming to their senses a bit more. So it does feel like a massive shift in consciousness in what I view to be a positive direction. My concern is if any politician becomes a godlike figure who cannot be questioned, then we run into really dangerous territory.
Yeah. Well, he's already been deified by so many people too and tied in with the QAnon movement and all of that. Yeah, like he's been there. I've seen like out in the boonies where I live, there are people who have these big banners and I'm sure that you've seen the equivalent of them where Trump looks like a warrior and he's
Yeah.
on a mountaintop. Yeah. So I think that's already happened, but I don't know. It's interesting that so many things that make sense are now put in the position of being delivered by probably one of the most hated politicians in the world. And I think that that's engineered too.
Mm,
So yeah, interesting juxtaposition, but I think totally not an accident.
yeah. And then it raises questions if you're right. How does this whole process work? How does the system work? Who's engineering it? What's allowed to be disclosed versus what's not? I mean, we haven't gotten the full story on JFK yet. Apparently, some documents are going to be released. We haven't gotten the UFO disclosure. We didn't get it in the first presidency of Trump. So, what is going on here? And how much of it is the bureaucracy or the deep state, whatever you want to call it, that's been in the government that literally prevents this stuff versus what the politicians actually want to do? Maybe they want to release certain things but can't. And then we always have to consider the dark side of blackmail, bribery, threats, mind control, even where these people might not even be in control of what they're doing because they've been MK Ultra'd. We don't know these things.
Lots of implications. Yeah, interesting. That's what I have to say. I was glad that Trump got elected, not because I think that I mean, I don't believe in really government anyway, but it's going to be much more interesting just to watch that unfold than having Kamala come in and just business as usual and the same bullshit rolling out. So this will just be a different brand of bullshit. But I listened to the inaugural speech just because, not because I'm like rooting for my dude or anything like that. And he had some pretty crazy, sensical things to say, like,
Yeah.
wow, okay, that sounds incredible. And I hardly ever think of that when I hear a politician speak. So I don't know what that says, but it's going to be interesting. That's all I have to say.
And the same goes for his speech to the World Economic Forum at the Davos meeting. He
I
said some
didn't
really good things.
really.
Yeah, he was challenging censorship, which the WEF has been in favor of. They call it the raging problem of disinformation. So he's saying a lot of things that counter the globalist narrative that many of us in the, let's say, truther community have been asking for. So let's see.
Yeah, we will definitely see. Let's see what else is going on here. Um, God, I was going to go another place and I've totally lost it. I've got a head cold going on, and so it's kind of giving me a foggy head. Let's see. So, do you think that we kind of touched on NASA a little bit? Do you think that it is yet another propaganda arm of this whole narrative, or do you think that um, opportunists have seized it in order to push another narrative that is completely contra what's the word I'm looking for? Contradictory to the one that NASA appears to be putting forth.
Hmm. It's a really tough one to answer. I mean, we look back at the history of NASA, for example. One of the leaders was Werner von Braun, who was
Yes.
a Nazi SS officer brought over to the US
Yeah.
in Operation Paperclip.
Uh-huh.
I like to emphasize that because there we have people in the political realm calling others figurative Nazis
Yes.
when we had a literal Nazi who organized this
Exactly.
NASA and they're willing to accept NASA. It was also led by Jack Parsons, who was at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He was a known occultist working with Aleister Crowley and the head of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard. They were doing sex rituals in the desert to try to invoke the Antichrist. This was the origins of NASA. So there's a big occult presence. That doesn't prove a flat Earth. Doesn't mean that what we're not in a spinning globe, but it just shows maybe this isn't like the most trustworthy of organizations.
You think?
It's really funny to play with AI on this because I'll ask it, would you trust should we trust any organization that was led by a former NASA
Nazi.
Nazi SS officer?
Uh-huh.
And it'll say absolutely not. And then I'll say, what if that organization was also founded by someone who was doing sex rituals in the desert and was, with the head of Scientology? Absolutely not. And then I'll say, well, I just described NASA. Should we trust NASA? And they'll say, well, yeah, we should trust NASA. That was, it'll make an excuse because it has to
What?
defend.
God.
So, but it is true that was a long time ago. That was around the time of the moon missions, and von Braun was involved in some of the early Apollo missions. But what we have to ask questions because von Braun was tight with Walt Disney, and so much of the narrative around space and space exploration and children growing up wanting to be heroes in outer space that came from what they were told by NASA and the affiliated organizations, and Disney was a big part of that. So I'm trying to put myself back, imagining if we were in 1900 and we were having this debate about whether Earth is a globe or not, and we didn't have NASA to fall back on or any other organizations. What would the arguments be like? Because so many people they want to forget physics and they'll just go, "You're telling me all these images are faked? That's not possible. It's just too hard to believe." They shut down. So it is a powerful thing to have this organization that gets billions of dollars a year to
Exactly.
allege that it's going into deep space and sending probes out and going to the surface of Mars and sending people to the moon. That's really hard to overcome for a lot of people.
For sure. And a lot of people have very nostalgic ways of looking at space exploration and, exploring new frontiers. I mean, we've had Star Trek and all this other sci-fi that, make it look really cool and exciting. So I think it brings a lot of the child in people out again and the sense of wonder, thinking that there's this organization and they're all about exploring the unknown reaches of the universe and, when it's really, really not that at all.
Right.
Yeah.
It might be a completely different narrative.
Yeah.
And those things that we're told are literally just fact fiction. And that looking up in the sky, we don't have stars that are light years away, that it's all way closer. You're never going to land on these things. But now that I've spent enough time in this alternative possibility of a non-spinning globe, it kind of makes sense that if you wanted to really disorient people, you could propagandize them with something that they couldn't verify themselves. And if you just look up in the sky, it's easy to reverse engineer this massive universe. And you could have a picture of it from your telescope and say, that's the Milky Way galaxy and it's so far away. But really, what is it? It's just a bunch of lights in the sky. And we end up superimposing with mental gymnastics, distance and size, when all of it just might be local lights.
Exactly.
So it's a matter of like practice of just observing without judgment and not superimposing a narrative on it.
Yes.
That seems to be the task everywhere. Politics, science, astronomy. Let's just try to state things as they are objectively without inferring a cause. It's really hard to do because it's built into our language.
Yeah.
An implied cause is built into so much of what we do.
Exactly. And because people are so fragmented now and they're all in their little echo chambers, it becomes very easy to for your beliefs to solidify and you stop becoming curious and open-minded and you become so positive of this way that you have of looking at everything because everybody else in your echo chamber is saying the same thing back to you. So, and then you just have all of these separate echo chambers that are just screaming nonsense at each other and no conversation is happening enough even to realize that, hey, maybe there's bigger issues going on here. Maybe what you think and I think aren't right at all, and there's something else completely different going on. But they're so busy chattering about wanting to sort of reinforce their own little ways of looking at things that they don't even consider anything bigger than that.
Yeah.
It's odd.
That seems to be our world. We turn on the news and we hear the news trying to psychoanalyze Donald Trump that he made a statement. And does that mean he's a fascist? And we're arguing over his words. Meanwhile, maybe we've been lied to about where we live and our basic nature as a human being is off base. And I also want to mention some of the questions about DNA. And I mentioned this in a very speculative way because I haven't looked into it far enough, but I think your audience would be interested in this.
For sure.
Dr. Tom Cowan, who's been one of the leading proponents of the no virus theory and challenging germ theory. I think he's been very brave, doing a great job. He's looked into some other areas recently and has spoken publicly. So he was on Alex Zeck's podcast. Also, Tom Cowan has his own webinar. He's a classically trained medical doctor. He's looking into the fundamentals of DNA. So, as a preface, the question is not whether or not there is heredity. Heredity exists. We know that when you have a child, the child looks like you. There's some kind of connection. The question is, what is the mechanism for heredity? And since 1973, when the double helix structure paper came out, excuse me, 1953, Watson and Crick, double helix structure of DNA, we have this whole model now of this double helix structure that is the blueprint for life. And that is what is being transmitted. And we can explain things as this physical blueprint. It's a very specific model. What Tom Cowan is doing, he's going back to the fundamentals and saying, number one, a nucleotide, which is the building block of DNA, those have never been isolated, which is pretty mind blowing. He also points out that the human genome has not been completed 100%. And furthermore, and I've asked AI, and AI has confirmed this to me, all the platforms, even like Gemini, we do not have a complete genome for any organism. Not 100%. There are gaps, which raises really big questions for everything, including virology, because a virus is supposed to be basically genetic material in a protein casing. And if we don't even have a full genome, I don't know what they talk about this whole genome sequencing. We have misnomers everywhere. So it really raises the same questions of where people are mixing stuff in test tubes. And then we see this picture of a double helix. We create massive narratives around it. And maybe there are other mechanisms of heredity that are not exactly the DNA model we've been told. And we're missing something big as a result. Maybe it's more energetic. I don't know what the answer is. But these are the sorts of things that we've got to be looking into because
Absolutely.
things happen with people in white lab coats playing with test tubes. And then we extrapolate so much stuff. We create narratives about things we've never seen and observed. And when we actually explore what the scientists are doing, sometimes it's way sloppier.
Exactly. And it's such a weird way of going about trying to comprehend the world. Remove it out of its natural environment, bring it into a laboratory, and then set up a particular set of circumstances in order so it will repeat itself. Like, there's nothing natural about that at all. Like, that's totally contrived.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, especially when you realize that the observer, when you talk about everything is vacillating between a particle and a wave, and then it changes into a particle when you observe it, like, and the observer has so much to do with what is being observed, like, what's really going on there? Like, it just seems like you're setting up a situation for something to occur, and you're almost setting it up to occur as if how you want it to occur. I don't know if I'm not doing a good job at explaining that, but it just seems like how can that be the basis of all of what we are allowed to believe and not believe based on that kind of way of trying to collect data? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Right. Well, it's getting stuck into it's affirming the consequent everywhere. That we get stuck into the model that it rained. Everything we observe is going to be fit into the idea that it rained last night, and that's why the grass is wet. There's no other possibility. So we create these massive narratives that take on a life of their own, and we've left out in the process all the other possibilities. So I do think we need to start from scratch. That's my current
I
hypothesis
agree.
with every area of science. Go to the foundational assumptions. I think what Steve Young is doing with atomism is great. Is there an atom with subatomic particles? This also has implications for nuclear weapons. Is it even possible to have a nuclear weapon in the way that's been described? I know there are many other anomalies people have asked. Of course, there are explosives, but a nuclear weapon presupposes very specific things at the atomic level. So it's like the implications are massive for all these things. And we need more people, hopefully brave scientists with degrees, because when they have the credentials, they seem to get out more, who can ask these questions. And then hopefully we'll see funding directed in these areas. I'll mention one point of encouragement that came about very recently. There's a podcast called The Telepathy Tapes. This is a series by Kai Dickens, where she looks at um, nonverbal autistic savants who are telepathic, sometimes 95 to 100%.
I've heard of this.
This is something I actually wrote about this in my book and End Upside Down Thinking. I interviewed Diane Powell, who's the Hopkins Harvard scientist who has been studying this for years. But for some reason, the telepathy tapes have taken off, and Kai Dickens has done a fantastic job. But I was writing about this in 2018, and I was coming way after people who were talking about this for years and years. But now there's a tipping point. The telepathy tapes were number one on the podcast charts for a period of time above Joe Rogan.
Wow. That's insane.
Incredible. That
Yes.
people are openly asking, "Is telepathy a real phenomenon?" Joe Rogan spoke about it on his podcast, and he said, "Have you heard the telepathy tapes? I think telepathy is real." This is there's something going on where now I think there will be more funding toward this because it's getting so much attention. So the question is, when and where is the tipping point for these other areas?
Exactly.
Because consciousness, there's been a bubbling up. There's so much good evidence from the University of Virginia, the US government's declassified documents, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, so many peer reviewed papers accumulating that people are really asking questions. So, when's it going to happen for cosmology? When's it going to happen with virology, these other areas?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. It's very exciting actually. And science is also limited, like humans are sort of limited by our senses, and when people have out of body experiences, they seem to often describe them as realer than real because they're apprehending their whatever environment they're in without the limitation of their senses. Scientists are also limited by their tools. Like
Right.
your research is only as advanced as your tools can perceive something or measure it or weigh it or whatever it is that you're trying to do with it. So it's all a work in progress. There has to be a lot. I think there has to be a lot more humility, along with obviously a big dose of curiosity in the scientific realm for it to serve any kind of function whatsoever. Besides
Yeah.
just being another arm of propaganda.
Well, one of the challenges is that in order to get funding, you typically want to have like papers that can go somewhere, meaning get peer review. And in order to get credibility, you want to have peer review. Maybe you want to get tenure as a professor. Speaking about these topics will get you out of that system very quickly.
Yeah, of sure. Yeah, definitely.
So you want to write a paper saying that viruses haven't been established using the scientific method. Number one, good luck getting that published in a mainstream outlet. They will probably shoot it down. And then also, you can probably say goodbye to your career. Stefan Lanka is a good example of that. Mainstream virologist who challenged the existence of viruses. Even back in the HIV era, he's done incredibly courageous work, but his reputation has taken a major hit. So for people who are just trying to collect a paycheck, imagine you're a doctor, you went through a lot of schooling. Is it easier just to collect your paycheck and say, "Yeah, I'm not going to change the world"? Yeah, it's easier to do that. Feed your family. So
Exactly.
I don't know how this is going to work, but I think we're seeing a bubbling up of a lot of very brave people. Tom Cowan is one example. Andrew Kaufman, all these people in the germ theory area. I think what Steve Young is doing with physics, and even Robert Bennett questioning geocentrism as a PhD in physics. So we have these heroes within their field, and I think it is important for people who have the degrees to speak out. It's way more powerful and also way more dangerous.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. There was a phrase that you said in your book that I wanted to ask you about. What does falsification is independent of replacement refer to?
Mm, great one. So actually, this was a phrase coined by Austin Whitsitt, who has the YouTube channel Whitsitt Gets It, a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah.
questioning flat Earth.
Uh-huh.
Falsification is independent of replacement. It means that when you falsify one model, you can do that without having a new model to replace the one that you just falsified. And that's a point of confusion for a lot of people because they'll say, "Well, if it's not a virus, tell me what it was." And you say, "Well, I'm not sure. That requires a separate investigation." And they'll say, "Okay, then it must have been a virus." Totally irrational. Same thing with, "Okay, well, it's not a spinning globe. Tell me the nature of reality and explain to me every observation. And if you
Yeah,
can't, I'm going to say it's a spinning globe."
exactly.
It's almost like they won't let you say, "I don't know."
Uh-huh.
And that's why I dedicated my book, An End to the Upside Down Cosmos. In the very beginning, I said, "To those who are comfortable with three important words, I don't know," because I think that's where we need to be basically everywhere right now. We have been able to falsify certain things in science and politics and elsewhere, but maybe we don't know exactly what's going on, and therefore we're in a very uncomfortable place of saying, "I don't know where we live. I don't really know what a human being is. I don't really know what cell biology is. I don't know how we inherit traits. I don't know
What
what's going on
consciousness
in
is?
what consciousness is. I don't know
Yes.
what's going on in the political realm, but
Yeah.
that's the truth."
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, that's humility. Humility is important. What is geostatism?
This was a term by Robert Bennett, who again is believes Earth occupies a special place, but doesn't believe Earth is. He believes that Earth is a globe. So he's in that intermediate area. But he refers to geostatism as Earth as a stationary globe at the center of the axis of what we can see. So he makes this distinction that we actually can't know if everything revolves around Earth, which is geocentrism, because there might be other things that are outside of our observational capacity. So Earth is at the center of the axis of what we can observe, to paraphrase what he said, and it's stationary. So that's his more precise term that he's come up with.
Gotcha. Do you see a logical next step for this? Like you went from the medical industrial complex to the cosmos. Where might a natural progression go after that?
Yeah.
You've covered so much in your books. It's insane. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like every time we talk, it's the same story that I
Yeah.
give you, which is I really don't know, and I'm not gonna do anything unless it's really, really big and interests me that much,
Yeah.
and maybe I'll never write a book again. And
Yes.
I'm there. I'm right there right
Uh-huh.
now.
Uh-huh.
I am feeling this desire to get the work out more because there's 7 books. They cover a lot of topics that I would love to reach more people with. I've not reached that many people relative to what I might have hoped for. I am on a lot of podcasts, but in terms of people reading my books, it's really small numbers. So this maybe is a time for me to spend more time on that and refine the arguments and communicate them better and better and even learn more. So, for example, what I've learned about genetics, I didn't know that we've never fully sequenced any organism's genome when I wrote the medicine book. That's a really powerful argument against the viral theory because you would want to have the full genome, and they're claiming they've sequenced SARS-CoV-2. No, what they really mean is, according to their assumptions, they've almost fully sequenced it. If there's no, so that's a, so I'm learning new things that help with the arguments. Um, Now, do you have ideas? What are some areas that I mean, history is one that a lot of people ask me about. What's our true history? I've been thinking about that since I started this in 2016, but that hasn't pulled me yet. But
Yeah,
do you have
there's
any ideas?
well, no, that would be a good thing to go to. I mean, besides that, I have no idea where. I mean, how do you get bigger than the cosmos? Like,
Right.
that's the big one right there. Um, but alternate histories, yes, mud floods, Tartaria, all that stuff you hear people talking about. Did you come across any of that when you were doing research for these books?
Yeah, a lot of it. And I mentioned it very briefly in the Cosmos book near the end, the idea of maybe there were societal resets that were pretty recent, maybe in the 1800s, or some say the 1700s, where we had advanced technology and some of the buildings that we see, like the Capitol buildings or advanced looking churches, that these were basically energy harnessing technologies. And that was known, but there were things that happened that wiped out large segments of the population. And we were repopulated and re educated with all this brainwashing that you cover on your show and that I write about. So, all these things that are fundamental to our existence were told the opposite because there was a brainwashing that happened recently. Interesting for sure. I haven't just gotten the hit to look into that fully. One of the questions that continues to bug me is like, what would be the mechanism of creating the amnesia? Because we all have relatives, and like, wouldn't our grandparents have known grandparents who would have known something to tell someone? And I have heard people say that knowledge is lost in a very short amount of time. But that's one of those things I would want to understand better. For example, um, and then also just geology in general is really we're making inferences. There's a man named Mike Wilkerson. Have you come across his work?
The name
He
sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't know who it is.
he has a podcast, a YouTube channel called Stellium 7. He's a chiropractor by training, but started to explore this mountain in Spain where he lives. It's called Mont Go, I believe. And if you go to the very bottom of his YouTube channel, it starts with the beginning of his exploration. This is a mountain that looks like it's an elephant, a petrified elephant. So what he did was he started to go through the orifices and said, "Okay, can we map the anatomy that we would see on a normal size elephant to what might be a titanic elephant?" And he's finding a lot of commonalities. And he's doing this everywhere. He's looking at rocks that he believes are petrified hearts. He can map the anatomy of the aorta and all these things to these rocks, which might just be bloods. So he ends up with this idea. I hope I'm characterizing it properly, Mike, which is that geology is basically petrified biology.
Interesting. Yeah, I've
And
heard.
that leads us to all sorts of questions.
Oh my god, yeah. Yeah, the giant tree stumps.
Yes.
That yes. Yeah, that's fascinating. Complete I mean, when you learn how much is seemingly fabricated. It's easy to get lost in the hall of mirrors and go, where does it stop? Does it ever stop? Like, where in the hell are we? I find that highly fascinating. And the
Yeah,
idea, I
and
mean,
then
have you looked into the World Expos at all? The World
yes,
Expositions? Yes, that's a
I have
fascinating one.
the World's Fairs, and I think Trump talked about doing a World's Fair, which raised an eyebrow. I wanna look into that. But, like, that the idea is that this was part of the re-indoctrination of society after the reset, that they'd build these ornate, elaborate little fairs with incredible architecture and then tear them down, maybe leave some structures. But what kind of technology existed to be able to indoctrinate people that way?
Exactly. And they were
Yeah,
so massive and so many, like, displays of new technology and I mean, did they build those buildings especially for the expos, or were they already there and they just utilized them? There's so many questions. The pictures of the construction of them and there's nobody around and, like, how would they house the thousands of people it would take to build something like that? And the impossibility of building it in such a short amount of time. There's so many things that don't add up.
yeah. So what kind of advanced technology do they have that maybe some segment of society knows about and is hiding from us that could perhaps take us out of poverty? Maybe we would be in prosperity because there would be free energy or who knows what else. So there would be a reason to hide this from us, to keep us in a state of control. And there are various cosmologies. One example, Joel Schaefer, who I believe I mentioned to you, he's a Toltec shaman. He never worked directly in the Castaneda tradition, but worked with other shamans who allegedly validated what Castaneda talked about. But in any event, their cosmology is that there is a parasitic force that has entered our world and has been here for a long time and feeds off of us. And the fear that we experience is actually not our native fear. It's the fear of the parasitic entity that works through us. And then most of our thoughts are not our thoughts. They come from this parasitic energy entity.
Interesting.
I don't know what to make of this stuff, but it makes me ask the question, what should we be doing here at all? Like, how should we be spending our time? And the answer I've come up with, and I will see if this is a smart one or not, is to try to get to the truth and share it with people, because maybe if we shift our consciousness, it's going to lead to liberty.
Yes.
The downside of that is, I mean, there's a lot of risk in speaking like this. And I mean, I was in a very secure career path in Silicon Valley and I gave all that up, and writing books is not an economically fruitful area.
Yes.
But it's like it's a matter of priority, because if your cosmology is that we're trying to free ourselves, then what would you want to do other than try to free ourselves? That should be the
Exactly.
top priority.
Exactly. Yeah, we have explored many of those topics on the podcast. One of them is the movement to extricate yourself from the government structure.
Mhm.
And how do you do that? Is there such a thing as sovereignty? And yeah, I mean, that's a loaded word in and of itself. But I see, and I didn't make this connection until just now, but we've also talked a lot about the different forms of manufactured scarcity and how
Mm,
that's utilized to control people. Make it maybe just kind of saying there's only a limited amount of resources to do something, to house people or to feed people. And so, some people are just going to have to be left out. Uh, the world is overpopulated, which I don't believe is true. I don't believe it's anywhere near being true. But it kind of instills this sense of urgency, fear, like, "Oh my god, we're doomed," you know? And maybe this on the cosmic level, what your book talks about is another huge level of manufactured scarcity, like, you're insignificant, you only have these few things to pick from on the menu of existence, and therefore, that's it, sorry, you just got one go around, you keep the machine turning while you're here, and that's all you got, like, that's a kind of a scarcity, a soul scarcity in and of itself.
right. Yeah, this manufactured scarcity, you're reminding me of the rhetoric we hear from the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset. My book, An End to the Upside Down Reset, discusses some of this rhetoric, which they speak of the problems with human consumption, like that we're consuming too much. I mean, consuming too much according to whom and why? Why shouldn't we consume a lot? It's like a foregone conclusion that consuming is a bad thing. Why shouldn't we enjoy life? It's always about limiting and restricting and viewing humans as parasitic to the planet. And there's too many of us. And if we just had fewer people, we wouldn't destroy the planet and humanity's so bad. And I see this a lot even in the spiritual community. I call it kind of like the spiritual left, if you know what I mean. Highly spiritual, but really in favor of the climate agenda. We have to restrict our consumption. Um, there are too many people like Jane Goodall. Sometimes we hear her talk about like we're overpopulated. It's almost like we shouldn't fully express ourselves and be fully free. I think it's contradictory to the spiritual message,
Absolutely.
but it's branded as a compassionate way of looking at things,
Mhm.
which is we're all one, we're one with nature, and we're destroying nature, and therefore we should restrict our own behavior because that's the compassionate thing to do.
Exactly. Yeah. We're an abomination. It's set up like we're the disease on the planet, and we
Right.
just need to, I don't know. Like you see these mock election signs where it just says a meteor and let's end it all or something like that. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Like there's a very possible way to work in harmony with our environment. The people who run the game or think that they run the game just don't conduct themselves that way. That's not the only way of doing it. Let's just start over. Let's do it differently. Maybe we need to live in smaller communities. There's
Right.
different kinds of energy that don't expend our environment.
And also get clear on what are the real environmental problems because if you listen to the World Economic Forum and a lot of people in those circles, it's all about CO2, very specific issue. There are many other environmental issues like our foods being poisoned and how many chemicals are we using everywhere. We could
Exactly.
list it, how the oceans, what's going into them.
Yep.
So getting really clear on that and giving those things adequate attention.
Exactly. I remember one summer when I lived in St. Louis in the 90s. There was a pollution alert, and so we were instructed to not have barbecues, during a few weekends, like, not anything about shutting down factories or anything like that, but that's just don't start the barbecues. It's like, are you fucking kidding me? Like,
Right.
take away the little pleasures that people have, and while you still crank out tons of shit into the air, it's just ridiculous, and of course, people adhere to it. I did not. I lit 3 barbecue grills then. No, I did not. I didn't do that.
But it will be positioned as, well, you need to do it. Otherwise, you're not compassionate. Just like you got to wear a mask, you got to do 6 feet. So it's people presuppose that the experts know what they're talking about. And if you don't listen to them, then you're a fascist.
Yes,
That's the
exactly.
narrative.
Or you're a right-wing, Trump supporter,
Right.
racist Nazi. Are there people that have never stopped wearing masks where you're at?
I've seen masks more recently popping up, especially with this alleged bird flu, which suffers from the same problems as all other viruses, meaning that even the CDC has admitted that it has not been purified. There's no purified sample. This comes from the work of Christine Massey, who's been sending freedom of information requests to health organizations all over the world asking for a purified sample of a virus by itself, because that's what you would need in order to run a scientific study with an independent variable and proper controls. So, this bird flu, they've asked, and there is no purified sample. And we're probably going to see the same thing happen. I mean, to some extent, I have seen some people wearing masks for that reason too. And then killing chickens and making the prices of eggs go up because the bird flu is going to kill everybody is based on a whole set of scientific presuppositions that have not followed the scientific method.
Exactly, and it's manufacturing scarcity too.
Yeah,
Lord have
crazy.
mercy. Mercy, yes. Let's all become self-sufficient and disengage from this crazy system as much as we possibly can. Um,
Yeah, well, as much as I would love to disengage too, but maybe it's because of the world that I grew up in. I mean, like going to Princeton, working in investment banking in New York, working in Silicon Valley, being in the belly of the beast. I would say that most people that I know believe the mainstream narratives and will still believe the New York Times. I mean, it's unbelievable, and think that we are headed to real Nazism right now. They're absolutely terrified that there is an attempt to cut back the government. I mean, there was a clip from the Washington Post criticizing the desire to restrict the government's power. So, I don't know what's going on, but there is a real brainwashing that I'm
oh my
on a daily
god.
basis trying to figure out.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like the left are the main, victims of that for sure.
Yeah.
Victims, I should say. That sounds like they were put in circumstances and they had nothing else to do but to react that way, but they willingly chose to go lockstep with all these authoritarian, institutions, and it's so mind boggling. Hopefully, someday a non biased history document will be written that will be able to see and look back with lucidity at how utterly insane this time period is. Um, without it being funded by Pfizer or something that's going to skew the narrative to make it all sound like the people who are shouting about being on the right side of history were indeed on the right side of history, and but, as with any good history and lineage of stories, that's gonna be passed around by word of mouth, I think, more than by the media that, we are more and more finding out that we can't trust,
Yeah.
except for
Bec
podcasts.
I think that's right. The independent media is where to look,
Yeah, for sure.
because the history books are already basically being written about January 6th and like the very fine people hoax where Trump was speaking about the Charlottesville, the Nazis, and he said there were very fine people on both sides. But if you listen to all the video footage, Trump says, except for the Nazis who should be totally condemned,
Yeah,
basically.
yes,
But
exactly.
politicians like Barack Obama, very recently in this last election cycle, and others are still talking about how Trump said there were very fine people on both sides. That's sort of branded in the history.
Yep,
So imagine what else is going to be branded in the history as real when
exactly.
it's actually false.
Yeah, yeah, I really have no faith in history books whatsoever, but,
Yeah.
yeah, but thank goodness for sane people such as yourself who are so good at consolidating all of this very complex information into a very digestible sort of way of taking it in and making it make sense. I hope that someday soon you get the recognition and the adulation that you so much deserve. Have you thought about starting a podcast yourself again?
Well, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I've thought about restarting the podcast. There is one season for your audience's benefit. It's called Where Is My Mind? It's 8 episodes. It's bingeable. It's about consciousness in the brain, near death experience, all that stuff. But it has not happened yet. It takes a lot of time and effort to do that version of it because it's a narrative form. I've got to do all the interviews and then take clips of the interviews and put it into a narrative. You're not the first person to suggest that recently because it is an easy way for people to absorb. I think books are more difficult, even though my books are on Audible. It's a little bit different than a podcast with music, and that's designed to be entertaining. So maybe I should consider that.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the same format as you did before, but maybe just
Mm.
a series of conversations that don't take as much post production. And that way it would allow you to put out more, I don't know, just a thought. I think
Yeah,
you
it's
would be
true.
great at it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, before we go, can you tell the people that are listening and watching where they can find you and your work and your latest
Sure.
book?
All of my books are on Amazon, and you can get them in hard copy, Kindle, and Audible formats. I narrate the Audibles myself. You can also check out my website. It's markgober.com, markgober.com. My podcast series, Where Is My Mind, which came out in 2019, but people are still downloading it, still listening to it. That's available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, all the major players. It's only 8 episodes, and you can very quickly binge that. A few of the episode, the way my podcast producers and I structured this is Blue Duck Media. I interviewed 50 people, and sometimes the interviews are like over 2 hours long. So they're long form like this. And most of them are behind a paywall on my website because we were trying to look for some way to break even, and not many people have subscribed. But a lot of people who have subscribed, it's a $33 one-time payment. They've said it really transformed them. And for me, I know that's true because when I did those 50 interviews, it transformed me. This was after I had written my book and ended upside down thinking. But we've made a few of those long form interviews available on my YouTube channel. One with Dr. Bruce Grayson from the University of Virginia, who studies near death experiences. Daniel Brinkley, who's had 4 near-death experiences and had a life review each time. Fascinating conversation. And also, I recently posted my interview with Diane Powell, who is the Johns Hopkins trained doctor, and also she was on the faculty at Harvard studying telepathic autistic savants. So she's the star of the telepathy tapes. My
Cool.
interview from her, it was back in 2018, but still very relevant. We posted that on YouTube very recently. So if
Nice.
your audience wants to get a few hours of content, you can just go to my YouTube channel.
And maybe they could be, companion conversations to go with whatever book is coming out at that time, assuming that you're going to
Yeah.
keep writing. fantastic books, and do not run out of topics to. I mean, they just cover so much. Each book does. Like, yeah, I think you've mapped most of most of existence. But there's always more. There's always
There's
more,
always more.
and there's
Yeah,
things within those books that you could dive deeper into. I'm sure too.
true. Yep. Yeah, I try to cover a lot in the books and not take people down a road that's, like, too detailed. That's been the approach so far. But another thing it's just interesting for me to think about is how my own thinking has evolved. There's certain aspects of even my first book that I don't fully agree with because I talk about relativity and quantum as proven science, for example.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
talk about Galileo and Copernicus, which is part of the heliocentric revolution. I speak about them in a more heroic way, whereas now I think they were contributing to the psyop, whether they knew it or not, I don't know. So it's like in my second book, An End Upside Down Living, it has a picture of a spinning globe on the cover, even though it's not about cosmology. So there are elements of the things I've done in the past that I would now refine. And maybe that's an okay thing because my first book, An End to Upside Down Thinking, is in some ways, I mean, it's very polarizing because it challenges materialism, but in some ways, it's the least polarizing because it doesn't go into politics. And it speaks about gravity and relativity in a conventional way. And maybe someone who needs to challenge consciousness will be more accepting of the ideas if they have these other paradigms intact.
yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe it worked for the best that I don't agree with certain elements of my prior books.
Sure. Well, it sort of maps your evolution as you go along.
Yeah.
So if somebody started at the beginning and took that journey with you, then maybe it would make more sense the more that they go on because they would see the root of where it all started and how it progressed from there.
Yes. And that's always my recommendation to people if you're interested in reading the full series. Start with thinking, then living, liberty, contact, reset, medicine, then cosmos in that order.
And you have audiobooks of all of them?
Yes.
Cool. Fantastic. Yeah, I was very thankful of that because I have, unfortunately, in my life, I have more time to listen than I have to read. So, yeah, it was very helpful. So,
And you can speed up the audible too
I
if you
would
need to, and then
never
it goes faster.
I would never do that. That's like
Okay.
listening to an auctioneer read a book. Yeah, I don't need to rush through it that quickly. I sometimes go back and replay stuff anyway as it is. So if it went faster, I would have to listen to the whole book at least 2 or 3 more times.
Yeah. That's the balance I always have to try to strike as the narrator of not wanting to go too fast, but not sounding unnaturally slow. But sometimes I do go really slow because it's mind blowing stuff.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, well, if I were hearing this, I'd want the words to sink in. This is crazy. So I always, it's an art.
Yeah, it is. I think you've got it too. I never thought once like speed it up, buddy, or like whoa, slow down. It seems like it's at the total the pace that it needs to be, and that's one of the advantages of reading your own work because you know how you want to deliver it.
Yeah.
You know how
Yep.
you what the motivations were when you wrote it, so you can deliver it in the same spirit.
Yes, absolutely. The intonations are from me.
Exactly. Yeah, you know where to pack the punch, whereas some audiobooks that I've heard read by a third party, it just sounds like somebody's narrating a film strip or something. It just sounds
Right.
like you're reading somebody else's book report in a very sterile way.
Yeah.
But yeah, yours wasn't like that at all. So,
Thank you.
okay, everybody, I highly recommend you check out Mark's work. This is his fourth time being on the Melt. So I also suggest, and we'll have the links in the episode notes for you to go back and see those episodes so you can kind of maybe map the evolution also yourself. And we look forward to our next conversation, whether that has to do with a book or not. We're going to have you on again anyway. So if
Thank
you
you.
agree to that, that would be
Of
great.
course.
Okay, cool. Mark, have a fantastic rest of your evening, and thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Our pleasure.